Jimmy Murphy, Pierre McGuire here for another edition of the Eye Test on the Sick Podcast Network.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to the Sick Podcast. The Eye Test with Pierre McGuire and Jimmy Murphy.
The Stanley Cup winning Colorado Avalanche. And after 22 years, Raymond Marsh!
The sickest NHL podcast. It's gonna be sick.
Hey, Jimmy Murphy, Pierre McGuire back here on the Eye Test. Another week under our belt. What a week that was, Pierre. I mean, we're still hearing the compliments and the feedback and just how many people really connected with that episode we did with Scotty Bowman and then also with Greg Carville as well. So, just a wonderful week we had there. But, yeah, you can't – like I said, Pierre, I mean, I don't know. We can only go down after Scotty, but no, we'll keep going up. But, man, that was something. And to see the stuff that people are saying, how it took them to different places in their lives means a lot to us. So from Pierre and I, we want to thank you as well. We loved every second of it too.
I can't say much more than that, Jimmy, except to say I'm still marveling at the way Scotty handled that entire interview. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell you, the response from college coaches and professional coaches has been overwhelming. I've had a couple coaches, NHL guys, call me up and say, can you forward me that interview? Because I've heard about it. So I'm like, yeah, sure, 100%. So that's what I was actually doing the last little while. It's been kind of neat. Jimmy, I just before we get started here, I wore one thing for you today. That's a little inside hockey. So my son Ryan went to the Belmont Hill School in Boston. Jimmy went to the chief rival, St. Sebastian's. Both of them have produced NHL players, Hobie Baker winners, legendary people in the game. And Jimmy, I just wore that for you today. Just
I appreciate it. I might have to dig up my old Arrows paraphernalia. We'll see.
And for our good buddy Billy Burke, the headmaster or the former headmaster at St. Sebastian's.
Yeah, congratulations to Bill Burke on an amazing career. I know he's on his way out to retirement, and he did so much for that school and for the hockey program and the whole sports program. So big shout out to him. And Pierre, before we go on here too, people may notice my background here. I don't know if you ever heard of the Pogues, Pierre.
I have. I know the lead singer passed on. Yep,
he did. Yeah, and it was he was. To me, I have like three musicians that really meant a lot to me in my life would be Johnny Cash, Bob Marley, and Shane McGowan of the Pogues. And he was something, Pierre. If you ever get a chance, just Google the songs and read the lyrics because people see him. He was this guy, no teeth. He looked like a mess, and he loved to drink his Jameson, and it was part of his shit. But, when you come down or you look at the guy and then you read his lyrics, you're like, wait a minute, this guy, it was just beautiful, beautiful lyrics. And what I love too, Pierre, is I grew up obviously at Murphy, growing up in an Irish-American family in Boston. My dad was really into the old traditional folklore, the folk music for the Irish. And he introduced me to that and would sing me so many songs, Pierre, as a kid. And then really had that influence on me. So then, I discovered the Pogues late in high school, early college years, and it was something. And I brought it back to him and I said, Dad, have you ever heard of these guys? And he said, well, I have, but that guy looks a little nuts to me. I said, Dad, I'm telling you, you'll appreciate him. He really pays homage to the history of Irish traditional music. And he does a great cover. And we actually just spoke about this. I was on the Jeff Marek show earlier today. The song Waltzin' Matilda, which is very, very depressing almost, or sad, but really moving ballad. And I played it for him, Pierre, and it was one of the few times I saw my dad cry. Brought him to tears as a Vietnam vet, and he heard that, and that became his favorite version. So rest in peace and Godspeed to Shane McGowan, and let's move on here. And Pierre, we've got a great show today. We're gonna get right into it here. Talk about some NHL goaltending and the differences between the goaltending now and when the pre-cap era, and sort of how the cap era brought in a changing in that. But also after that, really psyched to talk to Chuck Kaiton, longtime Hartford Whalers, Carolina Hurricanes play-by-play man, a Hall of Famer. Really looking forward to talking to him and getting some stories about you two on the road. So we'll get him on shortly. But let's talk, Pierre. I read a column. I sent it to you from the great Larry Brooks, another Hall of Famer.
Yep.
And he just wrote about, what has become of NHL goaltending right now. You look at the save percentages and the average across the league. I think he said it was something like 902 right now. And, goaltending's really down and the quality is down. And, as you and I were prepping for the show, you made some great points there saying the goaltending isn't really down. It's just the rules changed when we brought in the salary cap and the 2005 season, 05-06 season. There was a lot of different things that were catered to the shooter and really made to make it very difficult to goaltending because they wanted scoring. So why don't you elaborate on that a little for our viewers?
Well, first of all, I just want to compliment Larry on that column because I think he's thinking outside the box. He's saying stuff that maybe a lot of people are thinking, but they don't want to say. That's just the hockey nature. That's just how it works in hockey. But what I'm going to say is going to defend the goaltenders union in particular because I think I was part of what helped change it and cause problems for the goalies. Number one, the two-line pass came out. And forever and ever, I was talking about that on national TV in Canada and the United States. And I remember one hockey executive saying to me, this better work, because if it doesn't, your career's over. And he was serious. And you know what? It actually worked out pretty well. So I was happy about that.
Yeah.
The trapezoid came out, so goalies couldn't handle the puck. And because of that, it led to more forechecking. Zero tolerance on obstruction. Because there's zero tolerance on obstruction, more forechecking, more opportunity to create odd man rushes, more opportunity to get people engaged in the cycle. There was more time in the slot area, more time in the upper slot area because you couldn't use your stick as a defensive weapon into the hip of a player. So what happens when you have all that extra time and space? You can elevate the puck. So we see more pucks going into the top of the net than ever before. Jimmy, the advancements of science, carbon fiber sticks, every single year, these sticks get better and better and better. And it's not just the shafts, it's the blades as well. So guys are able to shoot with amazing velocity and accuracy because of the advances we've seen in technology and science. So that's another thing. Skill coaches. Back in the day, and trust me, this is 34 years around the NHL, there were no skill development coaches. And if there were, they weren't teaching the skills that these guys have today. Because if they were, we would have seen them a long time ago. The skill development stuff's only in the last 12 to 15 years. Slot pressure. Used to be if you went into the slot, you better pay a price. I mean, think about the late Clark Gillies. Think about Mike Bossy. All these guys, Steve Shutt, that went to the slot, and they used to get cross-checked in the back. You can't cross-check anymore. So guys now can post up. And what's the line that everybody uses, Jimmy? Take the goalie's eyes away. How many times did you see that in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s? Very seldom, because guys wouldn't stand there. They would get crushed. Shot velocity. We've never seen velocity on shots like this because of science, the development of skills, and more than anything, guys' off-ice training is so good. They're shooting the puck with more velocity than ever before. And finally, this is my last one, video analysis. Jimmy, it's never been better. When I was coaching in the league, there were no computers. We did all the tapes reel to reel. You'd get really strong shoulders, trust me, working with the VCR side to side. So you put it all together. Yes, the numbers are bad for the goalies, but just, again, so the listeners and the viewers at home know, I presented to Jimmy before we came on. I said, Jimmy, go look at the goalie stats from 2003 and 2004, and then look at the goalie stats from this year. And Jimmy, what did you see?
A drastic difference.
Huge difference.
Not just, slight differences or adjustments, like night and day, Pierre. It's amazing. I look at like Mika Kiprusoff that season, or Dwayne Rollison, two goalies who had very successful seasons. And then you look now, even like Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman, what they're doing right now, that's very rare. Their stats are rare. The more common, the save percentage are lower. So I get it. I agree with you, Pierre. I think it's kind of unfair to judge the goalies and better to really look at what the rule changes and everything you just discussed did to goaltending. And look, Pierre, one thing too, and we've got Chuck now, so we're going to continue this. Let's park this for Wednesday. I want to continue it. But one thing I do want to get into, and we can think about it the next 2 days, is the effect that you brought up studying, you brought up analytics, the effect that analytics maybe has on scouting goalies. And when I watch goalies sometimes, it just kind of reminds me of pitchers in baseball and the way coaches handle goalies and the way managers handle pitchers now. You know, you see in baseball sometimes, Pierre, there's guys pitching no-hitters in the 5th inning, 6th inning, and they're getting pulled for somebody in the bullpen because the analytics are telling the manager to do that, not the eye test. So let's save that.
Before we get one more thing before Chuck comes on, because he'll give us time. Don't worry. Chuck's not afraid to talk. 12 years in a row, Marty Brodeur had 67 or more starts. 12 years in a row. But here's what I want to throw at you. Here's some of the coaches he played for. Jacques Lemaire, Larry Robinson, the late great Pat Burns. All three of those men are Hall of Famers. The New Jersey Devils created the dead puck era. That's one of the reasons why he was able to play 12 years or more, 67 starts. Last year, 2 goalies had 64 starts. One was UC Saros in Nashville, and the other one was Connor Hellebuck. That's it. That was last year. Yeah. They didn't do it 12 years in a row. So because of the new rules, everything's changed, and it's put a lot more duress on the goalies, Jimmy, a lot more duress.
I'm with you. Well, let's bring on our guest right now, and I'm really psyched to talk to him. I'm sure you guys are going to have some great recollections and memories to share here. The Hall of Fame broadcaster, Chuck Kaiton, joining us here on the Eye Test on the Sick Podcast Network. Chuck, how you doing?
I'm sick. No, not really.
Hey, I've been battling it too, man. It's the first day
No,
I've felt it since
I'm
Thursday.
just enjoying the conversation because I had so many great years knowing our good friend, Mr. McGuire. And it all started back before 92, actually. He was Scotty Bowman's assistant in Pittsburgh. I walked into the Penguin office one day. As you know, Bowman took over from Bob Johnson, who was a good friend of mine as well when I used to do Wisconsin hockey. And I saw this guy walking. He was talking about his VCRs and tapes. He was holding a bunch of tapes going to the back office in Scotty's office at the Igloo. And I said, who the hell is this guy? And he told me, oh, yeah. He gave me the whole, chin and the whole thing. And he told me who Pierre was. And I think I briefly met him then. And then little did I know that about a year later, we would be together in Hartford in 1992. And I saw him in the parking lot of Glastonbury Hills Country Club, where we had the Whalers outing, and a friendship started from them. So good to see both of you. Good to be with you, Jimmy.
Yeah, for sure. Now, before we get going here, and I'll dish it to Pierre in a sec, I want to know, what was he like on the road? What was it like traveling with Pierre?
Well, it was always intensity in every level, whether it was on the ice or off the ice. Let's put it that way. He was a great guy to travel with because one of the things that when you while away the hours on the road and you have those 7 or 8 day road trips, and certainly in Hartford we didn't have as many as Western teams do today, but we always talked hockey and we always watched hockey. And I'll never forget, he was one of the first people in Connecticut when he was coaching to have a satellite dish in his backyard in Granby, Connecticut, and I never had anything like that. First of all, they pay coaches pretty well, so he had that satellite dish, and I had to go to his house all the time to watch hockey, and I did so lovingly because we would spend a lot of time watching games on the old dish. And you talk about technology. I heard Pierre talking about it with the sticks and the way the game is played today. It's the same thing with the video, and it was always great to be with Pierre, whether it was home or road, a consummate hockey man.
Jimmy, before I get going, I'd like Chuck to hear a piece of tape.
They have come up and have risen from the hockey morgue and have won this Stanley Cup of 06 with a tremendously large team effort. And as they are mobbing each other, as I said earlier, John, 9,393 days of frustration. And on the 394th day of NHL existence, the Carolina Hurricanes, the Whaler organization till 97, have won the Stanley Cup. And my friend, I am so happy you were at my side to see it.
So I have to tell you this. I was doing that game with the great Doc Emmerich and John Davidson. And as soon as it was over, we were walking out into the parking lot. It was after Game 7, Edmonton versus Carolina. I had people crying coming up to me because they had heard Chuck's call. And
Wow.
I heard that from so many people. And later that summer, I remember driving through New England, and I stopped to see some cousins in Hartford, and they were still talking about Chuck's call, even though the Whalers were no longer in Hartford. They'd been gone for a while. It just shows you the power of when you have a passionate, smart hockey man like our friend Chuck Kaiton is. And Chuck, thank you for what you said before. It's all true, by the way. We had so much fun together. Jimmy, I got to tell you, we don't go to every day. Either he would pick me up or I'd pick him up when we go to the airport together. It must have been boring if you sat in the back seat because all we talked about were the games from the night before. Oh, man.
Yeah, just terrific. I mean, thank you for those words because I did want to pay tribute, and I was always wondering, the way that series went with Edmonton, whether the Hurricanes would win the Stanley Cup after what happened with games 5 and 6.
Yeah.
But I was trying to tie in an allegiance, kind of a tip of the hat to the fans in Hartford for the 18 NHL years, and of course the countless years prior to that, 3 or 4 in the World Hockey Association, that people in Hartford got to watch Major League Hockey. And I wanted to do something, so I actually went back and counted the number of days since October 11th, 1979. So that was the only preparation I did on that call. So thank you. I appreciate it.
It's a spectacular call, and it's one for the ages. And just for our listeners out there, especially the younger ones, Chuck's in the Hockey Hall of Fame for a reason. His voice, his pipes are amazing. Passion for the sport, overwhelming. But knowledge, intricate knowledge of the game would blow you away if you spent a lot of time with Chuck. So, Chuck, because of that, and you talked about the longevity of the Whalers in the community of Hartford, you had a chance to spend time with some pretty significant hockey players over time. And so I'm going to ask you some names. Just give us a quick scouting report in your relationship with those players. Gordie Howe.
Gordie Howe. What can you say any more than your childhood idol? A guy that I never thought I would know from an intimate basis with his family, and become such a friend of his that I actually helped carry out the casket at Joe Louis Arena that day when Mark Howe was bawling like a baby with his dad passing away. I never thought I'd ever get that close. We had kind of a kindred spirit, being both from Detroit, or playing all those years in Detroit, and me being a Detroit native. A dream come true. Just a wonderful human being who I sorely miss, and I know a lot of people in the hockey community do as well.
One of the best books you'll ever read is by Gordie's son, the Dr. Howe, and it's 9 life lessons my father gave me. It's an amazing book. I love it. I cherish it to this day, and there's sometimes that I go back and read it because there are so many good life lessons. 9 life lessons I learned from my father. Jimmy Roberts.
Jimmy Roberts, again, a guy that you could have a lot of fun with, but it was serious when it came so. The thing I remember most about Jimmy was his practices without pucks, where he would have players take line rushes and visualize and conceptualize what they were going to do with the puck. And players thought he was crazy at the beginning for doing that. I also remember the hat and the gloves in tribute to, of course, the great late
Toe Blake.
Absolutely. He, I guess, Toe used to wear those gloves, and he had the fingers worn out on him. Jimmy did, but it didn't matter. The great cigar moments that we had together, because both of us were cigar. I don't know if we could call ourselves aficionados, but we at least had them, like I do with my good friend Nate Greenberg from time to time when I see him in Boston. But I again, Jimmy Roberts was a winner. And I think that's the biggest compliment. And it just broke my heart the day I walked in. And I remember on that October day, I walked in and I was told at our morning skate that Jimmy had passed away. And it just broke me right up. He was a very, very good friend.
Robert Marvin Hull, otherwise known as Bobby Hull.
Well, he didn't spend a lot of time with us, but it was very significant the time he did spend. And I've got a great story when he came to Hartford, which was on Leap Day 1980. He was introduced to the crowd when we played the St. Louis Blues at the Hartford Civic Center. He's waving to everybody, February 29th. And then about a week later, he scored one of his patented goals on Don Edwards in Buffalo. He wound up fired from the blue line. knocked Edwards backward, and it was reminiscent of my time as a kid because I was kind of rebellious. I lived in Detroit, loved Gordie Howe, but I was a big Chicago Blackhawk fan back then.
Okay.
And so Bobby Hull meant a lot to me, to meet him and to be up close with him. And the key story with him was when he came to town, our late assistant general manager, Bob Crocker, was entrusted with getting him his driver's license in Wethersfield, Connecticut at the DOT. And I happened to need one as well because we just had moved from Wisconsin, and it took me a few months to get a license. I think statute of limitations. I'm not going to get into trouble, but so I've got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and Bobby Hull's with us in the car with Bob Crocker, and he helps my wife out carrying Chuck, who's now 44 now, up the stairs at the second floor of the DOT in Wethersfield, Connecticut, while we get and that was the kind of gentleman he was. We also had a Bobby Hull night in Winnipeg, where the Whalers were the opposition, where they retired his number there. And he was just a gracious human being and a great guy to have for that little time. And, you know, I used to do the plane tickets back in those days, too. And I remember a game in Washington just before he ended up leaving our team for personal reasons. I dropped all the plane tickets, the boarding passes on the floor in Washington. I was so nervous because I just made it to the plane before the bus got there. And so he's helping me pick them all up. I don't know. I remember crazy things like that. And Bobby was just a great gentleman to me.
The great Dave Keon.
Well, I mean, what can you say about this guy? Again, had a great chance to visit with him at last month's Hall of Fame ceremonies. It was great to see him come back to Toronto. The biggest thing with him was the consummate professional. And, you know, I talk about those boarding passes that I used to have to hand out my first couple of years when we traveled commercial. He would always want the window seat. Gordie Howe would always get an aisle. Davey Keon would get a window seat. And I was told before I actually got to meet him my first year at training camp that he was very, very abrasive. He was tough to get to know. So he was sitting there one day, and I'm ready to give boarding passes out to him. We were going to Atlanta at the time for a preseason game. So it was the first encounter that I had with Dave. And I know he wanted his window seat. So I hear him doing trivia questions to Al Sims, the defenseman at the time.
Bobby Orr's old partner. Al
there
Sims.
You go. And so Al and Davey are going back and forth giving each other trivia questions. And I'm kind of eavesdropping and ready to give Keon and Sims their boarding passes. So I said, I've got a trivia question for you, Dave. And he looks at me like, you know, what are you talking about, rookie? And I said, did you know that Monty Hall was the voice of the New York Rangers at one time from Let's Make a Deal? And he goes, no, he wasn't. I said, yeah, there's your trivia. You can use that. I don't think so. So about a week later, he comes back to me and he shakes my hand and says, I looked it up. You were right. Oh, good. I think he did 50 games for the Rangers in 1955.
Wow.
Before, you know, obviously way before Marv Albert, but the other guy, who am I thinking of? Bud something. Anyway, but he did do hockey, and Davey Keon, and we became great friends after that. I guess I had my credibility unquestioned once
There you go.
Because he was one of those guys who was tough to get to know at first, but I love him as a friend, and I always give him a call from time to time.
So we've talked about a lot of former hockey players and late hockey players. What about the tandem of Danny Gallivan and Dick Irvin?
Oh, those two guys, they were my idols. I mean, I had several growing up in Detroit, and I was fortunate enough to grow up in Detroit because we used to get CKLW television out of Windsor, and I was able to watch Hockey Night in Canada ever since I can remember. And, of course, it started with Foster Hewitt, and we'd always get the Leaf games 9 times out of 10, but that one special time, usually every 3 or 4 months, the Leafs didn't play on a Saturday night. And we would get the Montreal Canadian games. And Danny and I was opened up to a whole new world of broadcasting listening to Danny Gallivan. And he was actually my favorite, and for many, many reasons, one of which was his ability to create excitement on a telecast, which we don't see a lot of today with a lot of the broadcasters. They just name names, and they don't give you that the kind of passion that I think the game needs on TV as well. And the next thing was working with Dick seamlessly. I know you talked to Dick, and he would say, well, I was just Danny, I was just carrying his bags, because he would just do promos and stuff. He wasn't a traditional color man in that sense that we know today, because he wasn't adding a lot. He was reading promos. But they meshed so well together. Dick's voice, unmistakable. But the Danny Gallivan story for me that will still, I'll never forget, was the first time I walked into the Montreal Forum. We had a game on December 1st, 79. You can look it up. We had a 4-4 tie. Guy Lafleur gets tripped by Ricky Lee with 2 minutes left, no overtime. So now the Whalers have to kill a penalty off. Well, anyway, the morning skate of that first time I ever walked into the Forum, the first person I ran into was Bob Gainey. And he knew who I was. And I thought, well, how does he know who I am? Well, he used to listen to games. You could get WTIC, our station, up in Montreal very well. And then the next guy I ran into, who got there earlier than I did, was the great Danny Gallivan. Mm-hmm. And I went up, very nervous to introduce myself. And he goes, young man, I think you're a very good announcer. And he said that to me. And what do you think, how it made me feel? Wow. I couldn't speak after that. And that was my first encounter meeting Danny Gallivan, even though I'd seen him like as a kid at Olympia, when Montreal would play Sunday night hockey games against the Red Wings. But I was so afraid to go up and talk to him, when I was 14, 15 years old. And here I was at the age of 26, meeting my idol, and another terrific individual. His use of the language was spectacular, just so great.
Jimmy, I used to be out scouting a lot, especially when I was a college coach. And one of the great parts about the Hartford Whalers was they had an amazing range with their radio station. So even before I met Chuck, I'd be in Western New York or I'd be in Montreal driving to Toronto. I could always pick up WTIC, right, Chuck? I think it was WTIC.
Exactly, 1080 on your dial, and it went really north and northeast very well, northwest to a certain extent. So a lot of people in Toronto. You're right, Pierre. It was a great signal.
And it was amazing. So, Jimmy, I'd be hearing all these things. I'd be like, this guy's really good. And he used to have a color man who was a great player for Hartford, Andre Lacroix, who worked with Chuck early on, right, Chuck?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
I would hear all these things, Jimmy, and I'd be like, wow, these guys are good together.
That's
and
awesome.
Then the Whalers started to actually get good.
Yep.
And Chuck, you were there when Ron Francis was a kid. You were there when Joel Quenneville was just coming of age. You were there when Dave Tippett was there. Ray Ferraro was there. You saw some iconic young Whaler players, Christopher Pronger, Jeff Sanderson. You saw some pretty young, good players. I wanted to ask you about Ron Francis. I had the privilege of coaching him. I was part of the trade that brought him from Hartford to Pittsburgh. So I know him in a certain way. I think you probably knew him in a different way.
Yeah, I knew him as you say, that curly black-haired kid. In fact, I have a picture on my wall here in my room of Ronnie actually doing color with me for a game in his rookie season, because he got hit in the eye with a deflected shot against the Calgary Flames. And as Ronnie's luck would have it, the puck went in the net, and he was awarded the goal against Calgary. And then he had, he thought he had lost his eye. And this is like halfway into his rookie season. He was brought up in November of 81, and this was early 82. And so now got to know him. I said, Ronnie, I know you're only 18. You're turning 19 in March. Come on and do color. And he was so mature. I mean, Pierre and Jimmy, the maturity of this young man as an 18 and 19-year-old kid. And of course, now what he's done in hockey in his Hall of Fame career, and now with the Kraken as their general manager, and he'll build that team. I think it was spectacular. And you're right, Pierre. I did get to know him on a personal level, because once a year we would drive up to see my mom and dad and my wife's mom and dad up in Michigan in the summer. And we would make a drive up to Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, just to go to Ronnie's family, because his father, the late Ron Francis Sr., and Loretta, his mother, were just terrific people. Francis was a Frenchman, but Loretta was an Italian, and she could cook. And we had wonderful, wonderful meals with them. We played street hockey. Little kids played street hockey with Ron and Ricky, Ronnie's brother. And so that's the level we got to meet him at, and we're still very, very good friends today. I still text him. I kind of live surreptitiously between a lot of these different guys that Pierre's talking about because they're all in the league. I was so sorry that Dean Evison lost his job in Minnesota because he was part of that group that Pierre's talking about, those mid-'80s Whalers that did so well. And like you said, Joel, hopefully he comes back into the fold someday as a coach, a very good coach. Great people. You mentioned Dave Tippett. I mean, so many of these guys that went on to coach in the National Hockey League. I mean, we had a special group of guys, but probably none more special than Ronnie.
Jimmy, everybody's got their own feeling for when they get to the top of the mountain in the NHL. And the top of the mountain in the NHL is winning the Stanley Cup.
Right.
Well, I've been blessed and fortunate enough to have called 16 of them, but also to have participated in winning 2 of them. And I think they're all different, even though everybody say, well, it'll be the same. And no, they're all different in a certain way. Yeah. Chuck, what was your top of the mountain moment in 2006 after your amazing call of the Whaler or the Hurricanes winning the Cup?
Well, I think it had to be when Justin Williams scored that solidifying goal to make it 3-1, the empty netter. Because a lot of people were nervous, Pierre. You got to realize, I mean, there were a couple of interesting things about that Game 7. And a lot of people thought, well, maybe it shouldn't go to a Game 7. I mean, after all, the Edmonton Oilers were 8th in the Western Conference, and the Hurricanes were 2nd to Ottawa in the regular season in the East. But that doesn't mean anything, as Pierre knows from coaching all these years. It doesn't matter what you do for the first 6 months of the season, the first 82 games. You better be ready for intense game number 1 in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And so, teams like San Jose found that out when they played Edmonton, and right down the list. And I think things fell into place for the Hurricanes all along. I mean, you look at the first series, they lost their first 2 games against Montreal at home. That's and then ended up proceeding to win the next 4.
They changed the goalie. It was Marty Gerber, and they switched over to Cam Ward.
That's right. Exactly true. And then Marty, you speak about Gerber, he won a big game in Buffalo in the Eastern Conference Final, shutting them out 3-0 when the Hurricanes' backs were against the wall in that series. But boy, the call that the moment that was exhilarating for me and for the fans was when Justin Williams finally broke the ice and scored in the empty net in Game 7 with 30 seconds to go or so. And I think I said something like the Hurricanes are going to win the Stanley Cup in all probability. I qualified it a little bit.
And then wait a second, didn't Aaron Ward put the puck over the glass and you had to kill off a penalty late in the game?
Late in the game, exactly. And speaking of Aaron Ward, the same Aaron Ward who actually scored one of the 2 goals before the empty netter. He and František Kaberle scored. I mean, how many times you're going to have 2 defensemen be your only goal scorers in a Game 7 like that?
Jimmy, I just want Chuck to say one name, and then we'll keep moving with the interview. Okay. There was a really good player for the Edmonton Oilers that year out of Providence College. His first name started with an F. His last name started with a P. Can you say that name?
Sure. Fernando Pisani. Fernando Pisani. I love that's one of my favorite
any names. Announcer. I'm telling you, Jimmy, I would break down the tapes before JD and Doc and I would do the games. And one time I said to one of the guys, get me the radio call. I want to hear how because I know Chuck's a stickler. Trust me, we used to go to the old Winnipeg Arena. Chuck and I, we'd always be there a couple days early with the team because we were flying commercial. And we'd sit there. And in the old Winnipeg Arena, there was a portrait, an oil painting of the Queen. Of England. I remember that. Yep. I'm not kidding you. Yeah. And Chuck and I would be there, and he'd be giving me all the intel of all how do you say this guy's name and that guy's name, and he had it all before any of these guides came out. Chuck Kaiton was the guide.
So this is before they did the thing because we get the game notes. And they'll do that now for like the last, 20 years. So
there's the guy that invented it right there, Charles.
Well, I have to also, Pierre, and a guy that I know you enjoyed working with for many years, Doc Emmerich, and I actually went to the PR directors' meetings at the draft one year. This is way back in the late 80s now. Yep. And he and I, as part of the Broadcasters Association, and one of the things that we wanted to do was create the pronunciation guide. And Doc is a guy that really gets a lot of credit for me because the way we did it was we had each broadcaster who was willing at training camp to go to his own players And there were a lot of guys that wouldn't do it or didn't do it, you know. So Doc had to pick up the slack, as I did, with some of the teams that didn't cooperate, so that we could get the exact pronunciations. Now, I know the league has taken that over since Doc's retired, but it was actually Doc Emmerich who started it with me. And we also did one other thing, and that was standardizing the press notes, what we have today. Everybody's got standardized notes now.
Yeah.
You never used to have that until I got to give Doc a lot of credit for that, because we lobbied for that for a long time, and they finally did it. But that pronunciation guide was very valuable, I think, because you know, a lot of people are mispronouncing names. I mean, you had one guy, Jimmy, in Boston. Everybody used to call him Sergei Samsonov all the time, and when he came to our team, I said, Sergei, I've been calling you Samsonov all these years. He says, well, you've been pronouncing it right. Well, I said, well, why didn't you correct? And I'm not going to name names. Some of your broadcasters in Boston or in Edmonton, even like, with Rod Phillips back then, when he did play against us as an Oiler in that series in 06. Why don't you? Oh, I don't care. It doesn't matter, you know. And that's what you get for the players' attitudes when you get onto that topic, right, Pierre? I mean, the players have bigger fish to fry than to worry what they call, what broadcasters call them, since they're not listening or watching the games anyway.
Yeah.
What did the cup feel like to you, Chuck, when you had it? What did it feel like in your hands? Did you believe it weighed 35 pounds?
No, I didn't. In fact, I wish I had lost 35 pounds so I could feel it. But no, that was in itself a real surrealistic. And first of all, again, I know he's out in Vancouver. He may or may not see this this podcast. I hope he does. But Jimmy Rutherford, as our general manager, said, you are getting the cup, and we got the cup in September of the next season, the training camp the next year. I'll be forever grateful for that, because we had it for about a day and a half. We took it around town. My 3 kids came into town with their girlfriends and wives at the time, and it was terrific. And I think the biggest thrill came for my wife, Mary, who ended up sleeping with the cup in the room. See? I'm outside, the cup's in there with her, and she enjoyed it, and it was amazing. And again, it was unbelievable, because I'm not into superstitions at all, but I can see why players don't want to touch the cup or touch maybe the Prince of Wales trophy or whatever before they win something. But it was incredible. And what's really incredible, Pierre and Jimmy, are the people that we invited to various parties we had for it in that day and a half. They can't believe the number of names. They can't believe how all of these names are on there. How do they do this? And you know, and that's what makes the cup so special, I believe.
I couldn't agree more. And you know, Kitty and I have one thing in common. We're really good friends with you. That's Chuck's wife's name, Kitty. And the other thing, Chuck, we've both slept with the Stanley Cup.
Well, good. I'm glad you did. And we had Billy Wellman from the league. I mean, Billy was in the other room, and finally, and that's another thing that people probably, I don't know if you've discussed this on the podcast before, but somebody from the Hall of Fame has to, if you're going to keep the cup overnight, which they allowed us to do until we handed it off to the late Dave Olson, who was the operations manager of the PNC Arena. He got it the next day after us. You got to have the guy there. So he either takes it back to his hotel, or you invite him to your house. And we had an extra bedroom at the time. So Billy actually slept at our house overnight so he could be in close proximity to the cup.
Jimmy, you know why that rule started? The Pittsburgh Penguins.
Oh,
we broke the cup. We did. Phil Bork dove off a waterfall in Mario Lemieux's backyard, and it broke the cup. Yeah. And after that, they made sure there was always somebody there minding the cup.
Well, I mean, I've got to tap on Pierre's knowledge about that too, because what was the first year that they actually even allowed team members and staff to even have a day with the cup?
You know what? I don't know, Chuck. Scotty Bowman would be better than anybody in terms of dealing with that, because he won the cup so many darn times, 14.
Yeah.
But, you know, Jimmy, before I turn it over to you, this is really important. And Chuck, we've had so much fun together in our lives. When we sat in Toronto almost 3 weeks ago in the lobby before the Hall of Fame induction, and then afterwards with William Scott Bowman, have you ever, I mean, in all our years, we've done a lot of cool stuff. That was amazing. Don't you think? That
Oh,
day,
absolutely
that
so.
afternoon and night, that was unbelievable.
Oh, it was. And you know who I was happy for? And you met him for the first time in a while, is my friend Henry Leon. We call him Tag. He's a golf
Yes.
pro in Pinehurst.
Yes.
He accompanied me on that trip, and he was like a kid in a candy store. He was a Division III goaltender in Vermont, growing up in Rutland, and he played at Norwich State University, and he was just sitting there listening to all of you talk about old stories. We shared a dinner with Scotty the day before we saw Pierre, but just to sit with him, you're absolutely right, Pierre. I mean, this man is 90 years young, with the emphasis on young. Scotty Bowman is an incredible human being. I think what keeps him young is talking hockey with people like Pierre, like myself, and like others. He's on the phone probably longer than he does anything else in the day because he's just talking hockey all the time. I think it keeps him young. He calls our house once in a while, but he doesn't get a hold of me. He talks politics with my wife. So they love to do that. I mean, he's a very well-rounded individual and a guy who's always inquisitive. And as Pierre can tell you from having worked with him, he knows the answer to every question he asks you. So you better not
don't lie.
You can't pull his leg. You can't say,
No.
well, I know it's this, when he can tell you, no, isn't it this? And then you say, he's right.
Jimmy, just one more quick one.
Yeah.
I think the best road trip the Hartford Whalers / Carolina Hurricanes had in 1994 all time, and I'm not sure they've broken it yet. Chuck, you would know better than I. We went to Quebec at 1. We lost big time in Montreal. I got really mad at the team. We skated before we flew to Winnipeg in the morning. We won in Winnipeg, lost in overtime in Calgary. Then we had a couple days off in Vancouver, and we won against Vancouver. And after the game, I told Chuck and Johnny Forsland, you guys, we got an extra day in Vancouver before we go to Edmonton and play at the end of the trip. And we won in Edmonton, by the way. Glenn Sather was coaching the Oilers, and Pat Quinn was coaching Vancouver. I'm just showing Pierre Pagé was coaching Quebec. He was in Quebec at the time.
That's right, he was.
Dave King was coaching Calgary. Anyways, I said to Chuck after the game, Chuck, you're my guest tonight, you and Johnny. We spent a ton. It was an afternoon game in Vancouver, too. We went to a place called Joe Forte's. Chuck, do you remember that afternoon?
Well, I didn't kill all the brain cells.
We ate so many oysters that day, Jimmy. I'm telling you right now, it was an amazing. It's one of those all-time stories you just remember. And every time I've walked by that neighborhood over all the years, especially in the 2010 Olympic year, I was in Vancouver so much. I always think about Chuck and Johnny Forsland on that trip. That was one of my greatest memories, was that afternoon after we beat Vancouver in Vancouver.
It was spectacular. It's a wonderful road trip. I mean, it's the kind of trip that I know the Hurricanes are on right now. I mean, at this taping, they're actually in Winnipeg right now.
There you go.
And going west. So, this is the thing that I miss the most. I mean, I know I've been gone for 5 years, but I still miss the people. I miss people, Jimmy, like Pierre, people that I mean, broadcasters that I've gotten to know over the years. And it's very sad at the same time to see the Rick Jeaneretts of the world leave us too soon. And guys like Bob Miller retiring. And, those individuals were very special to me. But there's also guys, we talk about young 90-year-olds. You just mentioned him earlier, Pierre, Dick Irvin, a terrific guy with that such a distinctive voice. And he's a lot like Scotty. Hockey keeps him really young as well.
He just had a hip replacement, Jimmy. He still wants to play golf. And
that's true.
Dick could golf. Like, he was a heck of a player. He really was.
He's right.
One more thing, Jimmy. See the man sitting over there, Chuck Kaiton? He doesn't tell you all the time. He hangs out in Pinehurst. Even though he hasn't broadcast in 5 years, I still think he could really do a good job broadcasting. But I know his golf game's a ton better because I used to kick his derriere.
Well, let's put it this way. I've probably shaved one stroke off for every year I haven't worked. So that means I'm still at 20.
That's great. Yeah, it is true. And you guys could both answer this too. I mean, you just made a great point, Chuck. A lot of times when I talk to players that have retired, and actually recently to Patrice Bergeron, that is exactly what they say. I said, what do you miss most about the game? He's like, I don't know. I don't miss the game that much. I just miss being around the guys and just the camaraderie. And that's the same that goes for broadcasters as well, I imagine.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I just mentioned him a few minutes ago, Nate Greenberg, who was the fine director of communications with the Boston Bruins for many, many years. He, through him, I've met so many great people, and he did the job the right way. I mean, that's another one of those, I'll throw a Danny Gallivan word at you. It's an evanescent art, the art of being a PR director today. You don't see it very often anymore, where they take you in and they make you feel, even though you're the visitor, you're special. He'll do anything for you. The Bill Robertsons that was in Minnesota and Anaheim. He was another one. Dick Dillman, the late Dick Dillman in Minnesota with the North Stars. I mean, I could go down the list of old-time
Alex Gilchrist out in Anaheim, tremendous guy.
Absolutely. He's cut from that same cloth. He used to work for Billy out there. Yeah. So it's the same. And you're right. And I don't know if we're losing that or not. But I just think that it's not the same. I mean, so again, as Patrice probably told you, Jimmy, I mean, he doesn't miss a lot of different things about it, but he does miss the people. And for broadcasters, that includes PR people and other people that help them along the way to help do their job.
Oh, yeah. I was lucky enough, when I was coming up the ranks, when I got into this business, guys, and Pierre knows this, Russ Conway took me under his wing. And
Russ, fantastic.
What a treat he was, and you guys were talking about your friend there, Chuck, at the Hall of Fame a few weeks back. Mm-hmm. I just remember the first time Russ invited me out for a couple drinks after a game. He took me across to the Fours. Across the street
Chuck, we've never been there before. What is
that? We've never been to the Fours, I imagine. And it's who was it? It was him. It was Chief. I think the old Dave Shea. I don't know if you guys remember him.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, Dave Shea was there. And then a couple other old timers. Oh, and Bobby Orr. Can't leave him out. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm the fly on the wall. And I'm just loving it. I'm absorbing all this. And I think it was Russ looks at me and goes, Jimmy, you going to say anything? I said, nope. You guys just keep going. This is great.
I know. I talk to number 4 quite often, and we share a lot of the same ideas of the game. And I think, Pierre, I heard your talk about the changes of the game before I got on.
Yeah.
And it's true. I mean, that 2-line pass, taking the red line out was, I believe, one of the worst things that could have been done. I mean, it speeds the game up, but now it makes it a different game. And I know he shares that opinion. He probably shares it a lot with a lot of people, including the commissioner from time to time when he sees them. But I don't think things are going to change. But you're right. I mean, just those stories. I mean, just to hear those guys. I mean, Johnny Busick. He's finally, and I saw him on the 100th anniversary, and I just was devastated to see the trouble he's having walking now. And he's not. But what a guy. And there's another guy that he'd pull 2 tickets out of, you need 2 tickets for tonight's game. Here they are. We had a lot of guys like that. There was a guy named Don Murphy who had Coke bottle glasses. He was the PR director of the Chicago Blackhawks for years, and he was the same way. You'd walk in once a year. The Hartford Whalers are playing the Blackhawks. Hey, kid, you need a couple of tickets for the game? You don't see that today. They'd have to e-ticket you now. I mean, okay, do you have your phone? Okay, we'll send you 2 tickets over and then you got to transfer them over out of the freaking Google Wallet or whatever that is.
Guys, I told some old-time Whalers fans to watch this. So, for them, I want to ask you, just talk about what it was, the culture around the Whalers in Hartford and how great it was to be a part of that, and really putting that city, that area. Because, look at all the good hockey players now that are coming out of Connecticut. What was that like being a part of the Whalers organization? I'll start with you, Chuck.
Well, it was real special, Jimmy, because number one, we were a big, small town. We were a town where the players were very community oriented, and the team did a lot of things in the community to cement the relationships that still exist today. I mean, you've got people like Joel Quenville, who married a local girl and goes back to Connecticut every year. Ronnie Francis married a girl from Connecticut. You have other people that have so many former neighbors and friends that they come and visit all the time.
Yeah.
And I think it's manifested greatly by the Hartford Yard Goats, the AA baseball team in Connecticut, that once a year, the second week in July, they invite players from all the eras to come back and be part of a Whalers weekend. And it's wonderful. And where the people, and you can't believe how many people attend this. Now, I don't know if the shelf life is going to last more than 7 or 8 years, because all of those people that say they used to listen to me are now 50 years old, which how do you think that makes me? But and then I've watched those players more importantly, and that's kept the memory and the culture alive. I mean, if there's any city that you could wish would have an NHL team again, it would be Hartford, and I think it would be greatly supported. But again, economics of the game, the geography, those are the things that really drove it out, unfortunately. And but it's a special place. And every year that I go back for that Yard Goats Whalers weekend, I'm reminded again of the impact that this team had on the community and the love affair it had.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. You know, Jimmy, when I was there, we were trying to rebuild the situation. It had really fallen into disrepair. So a lot of hard decisions had to be made. And one of my guiding principles through this whole thing was Chuck Kaiton. Chuck really helped me a lot. And one of the things we started to do whenever we would play the Islanders and whenever we would play the Rangers and whenever we would play New Jersey, we'd always take buses to those games. We wouldn't fly. And I would try to find a rink in Connecticut where we could practice. And we had just acquired Teddy Drury from Calgary. And I remember we practiced in a couple rinks where he had grown up, and kids would come from schools. And Chuck, it was all Chuck's ideas. He would give me these ideas. But we would do that. And to their credit, the players never, Chuck, I don't remember one player complaining when we used to do that. And so we weren't just trying to rebuild the infrastructure of the team, Jimmy. We were trying to rebuild the relationship with the community. Yeah. And I think eventually, as Chuck said, it did get rebuilt. But the problem was there was a lot of heavy duty damage that had been done. And thus new ownership came in. And then, you know, they decided to move to Carolina. But I enjoyed my years there. I know one of the best parts about it was getting to be a lifelong friend of Charles Kaiton.
Thank you.
Proud Maize and Blue graduate, by the way, Jimmy. But here's where it gets a little squirrely for Chuck. He's proud Maize and Blue, but I think his best broadcasting days were at the University of Wisconsin when the great Badger Bob Johnson was.
Oh, yeah.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, from a success standpoint, from an enthusiasm standpoint, I mean, when I started doing Michigan hockey in 1970, we played in a little 1,500 seat arena called the Michigan Coliseum, but it got converted into a squash and tennis facility after we moved to Yost Ice Arena in 1973. So and even that arena right now is not the greatest, although they renovated it a couple of times. It used to be where Cassie Russell played basketball, for crying out loud, years ago. But the Michigan program was not what Wisconsin's program was under Bob Johnson. And the ironic thing is, the first year I ended up going to Wisconsin, Bob wasn't our coach because he coached the U.S. Olympic team in 1976. Right.
Yeah.
And so I didn't get to know him until the next year. But boy, it was terrific. He was another guy that I cherished getting to know very well. And of course, his sons, Mark and Peter, and the rest of their families and everything. Another guy, and he was prophetic. I mean, in 1986, he almost hit the nail on the head.
I'm going to interrupt him, but it was Calgary versus Hartford. And in 1986, Badger used to tell me this story all the time when I worked for him. They were the two best teams in the league.
Wow. Well, that's right.
They were at that time of the year, they were the two best teams in the league. Said this is a preview to the Stanley Cup final.
You got that right. And we played again. And he told me that in January after we beat them 9-1 in Calgary in January.
So you know what Badger
game with his late great wife Martha. Now we go out and Badger Bob's telling me, "Don't worry, we got two great teams." and everybody was calling for his head on their 9th straight loss. But Cliff Fletcher stayed right with him as the general manager. The rest is history. They turned it right around. They go and they end up playing the Montreal Canadiens, whom we should have beaten in '86, but lost in Game 7 in that overtime when Claude Lemieux scored.
So Jimmy, so Chuck talks about the 9-goal win by Hartford and Calgary. Mm-hmm. Bob Johnson told me about his press conference afterwards. You could Google it. I'm sure it's still there. He said all he talked about was the positive things the team did. Our power play was good. Our forecheck was good. There are a couple other things that were really good that I like. So we're going in the right direction. Everybody's like, this guy must be coked up. There's something wrong with him.
That was him. You never had a bad day. What was his famous phrase? It's a great
day for hockey. And you know what? He's the one that said that, and it's all over the hockey world now.
Yeah.
Bob Johnson said that.
Absolutely true. And the only other thing for, like you say, Jimmy, if Whaler fans are watching this, they'll completely remember that in the only time in franchise history, never mind just Whaler history, no Hurricanes have done this, double hat tricks in that game. Dean Evison had one. Kevin Dineen had one.
Yeah. Wow. That's great trivia.
9-1 win.
That's some great trivia.
His birthday, by the way.
Well, I used to listen to you. I went to UMass Amherst. And so we were out at UMass. You can pick up the games easy there. We used to drive right down 91 to go to the games. And those Bruins-Whalers games back in the day, it was like just split right down the middle in the Civic Center. It was great. It was like being at a college game. It was just so much fun. And I missed that tremendously.
Yeah. Well, don't let Mike Milbury hear this, but that 86 team ignited with a left hand of Kevin Dineen into the jaw of Mike Milbury in one of those games. I'll never forget the Whalers won that game, I think 10-2. And at the end of the game, Pierre will know where the bus is on the P3 level, the visiting bus. Well, there was a car blocking. You'd have to go up a ramp to get on I-84 out of the building.
That's right, yeah.
And there was a car parked blocking the bus. O'Reilly told the team, get showered as fast as you can, get on that freaking bus right now. He was so hot. He was coaching the team then. He goes out and there's a car blocking the bus from leaving. He took a tire iron and broke the guy's windshield to try to get into the car to move it. I never saw anything like that in my life. And I don't know if he got sued or what ended up coming up with it. That's how Taz was. You know that.
I think Nate Greenberg took care of that one, Chuck, too.
He probably did. Like he did all the time for all those guys. And that was why he was
moved it over.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Charles, awesome. We cannot thank you enough for taking the time, Chuck. You're just awesome. You're just a fountain of information. You are, in my opinion, one of the top 5 broadcasters in the history of the sport. It was an amazing privilege to work with you, to do interviews with you on an everyday basis. But to be a lifelong friend is an amazing privilege to me. Thank you so much, Chuck. It really means a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank you, Jimmy. A wonderful show, and I enjoy your the eye test, and I hope that people probably get blindfolded when they see my face on this. So this is the audio version of it.
You're a good-looking lad. Don't worry. All right, we appreciate you joining us. That's Chuck Kaiton. He's Pierre McGuire. I'm Jimmy Murphy. This has been another edition of the Eye Test.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Eye Test with Pierre McGuire and Jimmy Murphy on YouTube, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.